This is Marion's Natural News.
Hello everyone, this is Naturalist James Anderson, and welcome to Marion's Natural News. Today's episode, we're going to learn about what do animals do during the winter season. I get this question asked a lot because people tend to care about the animals and say, well, how do these animals, how do they survive during these cold, harsh conditions? Versus us humans, we like to live in nice, warm houses or buildings. And I said, well, animals are adapted this time of year. So hopefully, after today's episode, you'll learn about what animals do, but also some ways on how you can help out wildlife during this winter season. Stay tuned and enjoy the show.
So before we go on, one thing I want to state is we're going to be talking about what do animals do during the winter season here in the state of Ohio, because what animals do here in Ohio is going to be a little bit different than where like in warmer climates like Florida or in the Southwest or other parts of the world. So I just again want to clear that up as we get into the program. So again, you're probably asking yourself, how do they survive these cold, frigid temperatures? Let alone myself, I can't barely handle when it's below 32 degrees. You know, us humans, we're pretty lucky. We have a lot of different types of clothing that can keep us warm. A lot of us are fortunate. We can keep our houses warm during the night. But it's probably been set in the back of your mind. And again, you're like, well, how do these little creatures, how do they do it? And it's amazing on how these animals have adapted for many years. And we're going to be talking about some of the different survival strategies that different groups of animals do. So there are basically three survival strategies that animals do here to survive during the winter season, and we're going to talk about each one of these survival strategies individually. But the first one that a lot of you are probably familiar with is hibernate. The next one that again a lot of us are familiar with is migration, and the last one a lot of us don't tend to think about, but you either prepare for winter, or I like to say you got to tough it out. So now we're going to talk about the survival strategy of hibernation. And I know a lot of you know what that means, but if you're not familiar or if you forget, hibernation basically means when a plant or an animal stays at a dormant state during the winter season. Now, the big question a lot of you might be asking is, why do animals hibernate? Well, we have to think about this time of year in Ohio, especially. Is there a lot of natural foods out there? And the answer is no. So, when you're a big animal like a bear or a groundhog or anything like that requires a lot of food, you're going to have to conserve energy. So, hibernation is a great survival strategy to survive during the winter season. Now, the next question you're probably going to be asking is, what's happening during hibernation? It's basically when the animal goes into a deep sleep, but a lot of things is happening to the animal's body. With a lot of animals, the heart rate slows down, body temperature slows down, and a lot of other life processes like metabolism that slows down as well. I give you an instance about groundhogs. Groundhogs are probably one of the best hibernators that we have here in the state of Ohio. And now you're probably thinking, well, what about bears? But I like to compare bears and groundhogs kind of like diesel and gasoline engines. Groundhogs can lower their temperatures just above freezing, so it'd be about 33, 35 degrees Fahrenheit, versus a bear would only drop its body temperature about 9 to 14 degrees, so it's still probably staying about in the probably the 70s or 80s. And what's also too about the heartbeat. When a groundhog's active, their heart rate it's about 120, 130 beats per minute. But when a groundhog is hibernating, their heart rate goes to 4 beats per minute. Now that is a lot, isn't it? Uh, I mean that groundhog is. If you say, well, that groundhog's barely living, but yeah, groundhogs again are great hibernators, and like I said earlier, they're better than bears. It takes a while for groundhogs to kind of awaken from hibernation versus bears. Their heart rate doesn't go down as much, body temperature doesn't go down as much, so they can be easily awakened from warm temperatures. Now, some animals, like squirrels, skunks, raccoons, and opossums, they really don't hibernate during the winter, but they do a thing what's called torpor. And it's also known as temporary hibernation. And the only time they go under this temporary hibernation is under extreme cold temperatures. So if you guys remember, probably this month of January, we were, in the low teens to zeros to even to the negative digits. So that was probably the time where you weren't seeing these types of animals being active. So now we're going to talk about migration, another survival strategy that animals do to survive the winter season. And migration means a seasonal movement of animals from one region to another. And a lot of you might be asking yourself, well, why do animals migrate? The big factor is food availability, kind of like we talked at the beginning of the program. At this time of year, especially in Ohio, there's not a lot of natural food sources that are available to a lot of different animals. Also, to a lot of birds and some of our different animals are not fan of our colder weather, so they do like to migrate to some of the warmer regions like Florida, the Carolinas. Some even travel down to South America or other parts of the world. A lot of people don't realize that bats migrate as well. Now, here in Ohio, we don't have a lot of caves. When you go more in southwestern or southeastern Ohio, caves are more predominant. But like here in Marion County, there aren't no caves. So bats in Marion County and north would have to migrate down to either southern Ohio or in parts of Indiana where caves are more abundant. Not only will they migrate, but they will also hibernate as well. So now we're going to talk about our last survival strategy, and I like calling it toughing it out or preparing for winter. So this is going to be at a time where some different animals are going to do some different types of strategies, and one of the strategies that a lot of our animals do is they're going to eat a lot of food during the winter season. So this will increase fat reserves. So then, when there's not a lot of food available during the winter season, these animals can live off the fat reserves and can draw energy from that. Now, some animals, like squirrels, will store nuts in many places around their habitats into piles, which is called caches, or a lot of times they'll bury their nuts into the ground. Now, another option animals can do if they're going to prepare for winter or toughen out is they're going to have to switch their diets, which basically means they have to eat what is available. Take, for instance, the robin. As we know, robins during the spring and summer like to eat a lot of worms. Well, during the winter season, do you see a lot of worms active? Usually not. So, this is where robins would have to adjust to eating more seeds and fruit. And also take instance for deer and rabbit. They'll take advantage of eating flowers, leaves, but during the winter season, they may have to eat more tree bark and branches. So, not much nutrition, but it's enough to get them by. One thing I do want to note we've talked about all the different types of survival strategies that animals do during the winter season. Weather is a very, very big factor about animal behavior. If you recall last winter and even the winter before, we were very high temperatures, in the 50s and 60s, and a lot of us liked that temperature, but it really wasn't good for wildlife because those high temperatures were long and continuous, and so you had some groups of animals like reptiles and amphibians starting to think, oh, hey, it's spring, it's time to come out and it's time to be active. But in reality, it was still winter. If you also recall some of our flowers, not just agriculture crops, but our wildflowers, they were starting to bloom real early. So again, the warm weather, even though we might like it, but again, it can hurt wildlife, especially when you're warm and then you get a cold snap, and then you're warm and then you get a cold snap. It's just, it's best if nature is long and continuous, not just fluctuating in a dramatic time frame. So now that we've learned all the different types of survival strategies that animals do to survive the winter season, the next question that might be running through your mind is, how can I help wildlife during the winter season? And some of the things you can do, of course, if you feed your birds, that's a really great thing to do.
During the winter season.
Kind of keep in mind at this time of year, they're going to need a lot of foods and fat. So if you have suet cakes, peanut butter, black oil, sunflower seeds, and get anything with a really high fat content really will help out birds. And you're going to say, well, isn't that kind of bad for birds? Oh, you got to kind of remember birds and a lot of our wildlife have a higher metabolism than us humans, so they can afford to eat those kind of high fat content foods. And the next thing you could do is you could provide some type of shelter, rather it's kind of a natural shelter or a man-made shelter. Kind of again, go for the birds. You can make bird boxes. There's also bat boxes that you can make. And then some of the natural things you can do. So say you have some yard projects, you got to trim some branches off of your trees, or if you have to create giant brush piles, instead of burning it, actually just let it go and let wildlife use it. Think about after the Christmas season, if you use live Christmas trees, instead of throwing it out or burning it, you could actually your Christmas tree could be used as a home for wildlife. So all those little things can help these animals survive during the winter season. Well, people, that wraps up our program. Hopefully you all learned something new. Hopefully you learned on how these animals survive during the winter season. And I also hope that you learned on how you can help wildlife out. So remember, folks, have fun, be safe, and most of all, go out and explore your Marion County parks. I'm Naturalist James Anderson, and I'll see you next time on Marion's Natural News.